Hey guys, today we're talking about something that I really enjoy talking about, and it is dream sequences. Dream sequences in movies. What are your favorites and why? Of course, as I always say, movies are kind of an extension of dreams in terms of just movie philosophy and everything. They're kind of a projection of a lot of the things that we hold very close to the chest. And that's part of why I think they're so interesting, because I think they're more revealing often than the concrete things. They're more revealing than the things that are actually happening that are literal. Abstractions and random stray imagery, all of that can convey a lot, especially when it's done really well. And there are some dream sequences that demand a lot of special effects and everything, and others can be very simple. So it really just depends on the tone of the film. But we'll start with the first one. And let me just say before I read this, this is going to be about a movie called Audition. Anybody who hasn't seen it, please do not watch this. Please just because there are going to be spoilers in this particular response, and it's one of those movies that you really don't want spoilers for if you have an interest in it. So just letting you know that right away. But for those who have seen it, the long dream sequence in Miike's audition, right before the big torture scene happens, it's like the movie completely mutates itself from what we thought was just a typical romance tale between two people into a downright horrific, surreal nightmare that just gets darker and darker as it goes along. And before we know it, Ayama is getting his feet sawed off by piano wire. One of the greatest endings to a horror film, period. Absolutely, I agree. It's my favorite horror film, probably, or up there, maybe top 3. And I think this is a perfect example of a dream sequence that feeds into everything that I just said, right before the beginning of this. You kind of have to be careful about how you implement your dream sequence. At what point in the film, that it's going to exist is very important because, again, like I said, it's allowing for a lot of vulnerability to come forward if it's done well, typically, as is the case for this one. And it's right at a point where things are starting to get very dark. The film does begin in a way that is very deceitful, very much like a Ozu film. It's very calm and quiet, and it has something gentle and romantic and peaceful about it. And you find yourself kind of taken with it slowly. But if the film is about anything, it's about traditions and how that colors the way we see people, facades and perceptions of different people, especially in a dating situation, especially how men view women and vice versa. But a lot of toxicity and pain and a lot of Freudian stuff naturally exists beneath the surface and is kind of bubbling up. And that's what this film is kind of exploring in a sense. And I think that those dream sequences are so interesting because you're not quite sure what they are. It really is disorienting in the sense that it's like, it's not like somebody just wakes up and it's like, where am I? And you know that it's a dream. This is very much, it's like the film is starting to kind of unravel a little bit, but in a way that is fully in control. It's more kind of making you think it's unraveling, I think, as an audience member. But it's like, you're not sure if it's the actual movie or if it is a dream. You're not sure what is real, what is not. You're not sure what are memories and what are dreams, or if it's a combination of the two. Because our main character is seeing the past of somebody else revealed, but it's like, he wasn't there for any of it. So it's like, how is he privy to this information? Sure, he's given breadcrumbs and he's provided certain insights, absolutely, but it's not like he's actually there to experience a lot of this trauma. And yet it's like he's there. But I also love how, it's not just about this one woman that he's fixated on, and it's not just that unraveling in the dream. All kinds of different women in his life are all kind of intersecting and joining together. As I said, it is very Freudian. It's all these subliminal things that might be embarrassing, and it happens to us in dreams, It's like he even starts kind of fantasizing about his 23-year-old son's girlfriend, which is interesting. And then, maybe other sexual relationships that he's had in the past, as well as his wife, as well as this new girl he wants to marry. It's all so incredibly interesting, and there's a real emotional core to it. And once the film finally finishes, once you get to that climax and you realize everything joins together, it becomes something deeply devastating. So I think that this is an example of something where everything comes to fruition. It is the emotion, it's the disorienting feeling, but it's also arriving at something very, very powerful. The beginning dream sequence in 8½, the first 3 minutes manage to encapsulate the main themes of 8½, with only a few words of dialogue spoken. In these 3 minutes, Fellini establishes a very surrealist tone, which is a stark departure from his previous films. In this sequence, Fellini lays the foundation for his themes of emotional and artistic isolation, artistic freedom, and the manipulative nature of films themselves. Yes, I think that 8½ is one of Fellini's most ambitious films, and I think one of his absolute best films. And yes, it's one of the great films about the creative process. Fellini loves performance art, and he loves kind of dreamy, psychedelic sort of things. You even see hints of that in his earlier work, which is more akin to Italian neorealism, and it's much more simple and stripped back naturally. But here we're really seeing him, allow that to exist at the forefront. And I will never forget the first time I saw that opening to 8.5. And if you haven't seen it, check it out on YouTube. And it's, it's something that I don't think you will forget. It's a brilliant dream sequence, very short, and it's absolutely nightmarish. And I feel like we've seen so many people take images from that and try to recreate them in very interesting ways. But to begin with a dream is a very difficult thing to do, because it's like, with this character, our main character in the film 8.5, we don't know him. We don't know anything about him. And yet through these images and the way that they kind of are pieced together, you feel like you learn everything about him in a way. It's like you completely understand emotionally his conflict without even knowing him or even knowing really what the plot is yet. But it's all there somehow. And again, that's a feeling of dreams. It gives you some sort of feeling that you can't quite grasp in a literal sense. I love the claustrophobic feeling on the road, stuck in traffic, and all those people are staring at him in that way. That is incredibly uncomfortable. And then, of course, him being on the string in the air, and it's like he's being pulled back to reality in a sense, or is trying to be pulled back to reality constantly throughout the film. It's like a film that's kind of in between reality and imagination. But honestly, I do tell people sometimes, if they haven't seen 8.5, to just watch that opening dream sequence, and if it intrigues you, you're certainly going to want to watch more. And I think everybody who has watched it has wanted to keep watching the film. Belle du Jour's dream sequences really capture both the perverse yet comforting nature of fantasy. The dream sequence always present a pleasant vision of Séverine, I never know how to say her name, but Catherine Deneuve's character, imagine for herself, and then it's abruptly stopped with a scene that poises her in complete contrast to the fantasy. It's fascinating because her fantasies and acting on them actually do improve her relationship with her husband Pierre. The ending dream sequence always leaves me polarized on whether her escape to fantasy is either volatile or actually helpful. You've nailed it. I absolutely agree with you. I love Belle du Jour because I love Buñuel, of course. I think a lot of people love Luis Buñuel. If there's somebody who does dream sequences maybe the best of anybody, it's probably him. And I think a lot of people who do a lot of dream sequences nowadays owe a lot to him. They owe a majority of things to him. But I do think of all the films that he did, when it comes to Belle du Jour, I think it's a departure for him when it comes to dream sequences, because it's not like what he's used to doing. These are they're deceptive. As you said here, it's like, in some ways, it's like she's improving her relationship without realizing it through fantasy. And also at the end, you talk about, is she volatile or is she actually improved as a human being? And we don't really know. But there's always kind of a slight sting to everything. There's a bitterness to everything, whether it's beautiful, whether it's haunting, in these dream sequences that always keep you unsettled. But what I love about them is, like I said, they are so simple. In the sense that they kind of run together. There are a lot of times where I don't realize, just like Audition, I don't know where the dream is ending and reality is, going forward. And there is one scene that has always puzzled me. To this day, it still really confuses me. And I think it confuses a lot of people, but it's the scene where Catherine's character, it's the one time that she leaves the house, and she actually goes to a gentleman caller. And I'm so confused about that, because it very clearly is separate from the rest of the film. And I think I think it is a dream of some sort, and yet I'm not quite sure how it's working, and I'm not quite sure necessarily what it means. And yet it's stuck in my mind as something very, very important, very powerful. Let me know what you think about it, if you know what I'm talking about. What does that dream really mean, and what did it mean to you? The one at the end of 25th Hour. It's so clever. If you have been in a terrible situation and experienced this in real life, you'll totally get it. There is a split-second shot at the end of the movie with Monty still in the car on the way to Rikers, which to me solidified that it was just a projection. Loads of people disagree with me and think it's real, but I think it's one of them fever dreams on the way to a living hell. Absolutely. Like, it's absolutely a dream. I've talked to a lot of people too who think it's real. I have no idea where that comes from, because to me, it is absolutely a projection. To me, that is what's so devastating about it. It's because you're on the way to hell and you have this one moment of how my life could have been different, even if it is unrealistic. And I think 25th Hour is maybe Spike Lee's greatest film. I do think that there's something about it where it's like, yes, it's like a tinged American dream. There's a lot of imagery that is very beautiful and very American in a sense, but there's something dark about it, poetic as well. Like the famous "fuck you" monologue that Ed Norton has, it has a lot of gorgeous images, like slices of life in New York City and just like this America that we knew at the time. But the ending of this film kind of takes that and then fully makes it into this like rose-colored glasses sort of thing. And it's really beautiful because it's like, as you're watching it, you're not quite sure what's happening. It's like, as he's first getting into that car and his dad suggests, going on the run, you think it's real. Even though it may seem silly at the time, you're like, wow, is he serious? And then as the sequence goes on and it gets more and more unrealistic, that's when you start to realize it's like, oh, this is in his imagination. And that's when that devastation sinks in. It's like, oh, fuck. It's the music, it's Rosario Dawson pregnant, and it's the image of their family all in white, in front of the house. I mean, it's meant to be very cliche. I mean, the point of it is to be very sugary sweet in a way that feels like that. It's like a tinge of bitterness. And that's when, the nightmare is starting to bleed through. I agree with you. I think that's a magnificent and devastating ending. One of the most devastating endings I think I've ever seen, to be honest. Not in a movie, but the Sopranos episode, The Test Dream. Most of the episode is a dream sequence which displays all of that which haunts and angers Tony, his fear of death and all the people he has to murder to stay alive, free, and wealthy. What I also love about the episode is that Tony's subconscious propagates his delusions of being a leader. Tony riding on a horse like a general, and shatters those beliefs soon afterwards. Tony being chased by an angry mob and Tony not being prepared when confronting his coach. Amazing episode from an amazing series. It is an amazing episode, and it is one of my favorite episodes. And it is an episode that could have very easily jumped the shark. There are so many decisions made in The Sopranos that in somebody else's hands, it would have been jumping the shark. And yet they took it and made it poignant and powerful and meaningful. Anytime there is a dream sequence in The Sopranos, it's like, it's building to that throughout the show. Always throughout the show, we have this kind of meta sort of exploration, psychological exploration that we know we're building to. And, we see a lot of amazing dream sequences throughout The Sopranos. But Test Dream is the first time they just really took it all the way. And they go, we're just going to go on for a huge chunk of the episode, and you're not going to know when the dream is going to end. And that was a ballsy thing to do. I very rarely see television experimental in that way. And I think what's really cool about it is it really does feel like a dream. Like, you start in one location and then you go somewhere else, and it's like a rabbit hole. You're going from place to place to place to place, and you get so lost in the experience, you forget what came before it. You forget what goes after. It's just so... It is very disorienting. And it's little things like knowing when to dub Gloria's voice with Melfi's. It's like those little things say a lot about the characters, a lot about what's happening subconsciously. That said, there are some images in the Test Dream that feel maybe a little bit on the nose as far as dream sequences go. But at the same time, there's a lot of dreams that I have that are very cliche. There are a lot of repeat dreams. It's like Tony has a dream where he's losing teeth. That is a very common metaphor that people have in their dreams, a feeling of losing control or whatever. And so I guess, certain cliches are okay. I do like what you're saying there about, like Tony being a leader and riding the horse and having it in the house. I look at it also more as a metaphor for his infidelity to his wife, because his wife is sitting there, and what does she say? She's like, you can't keep your horse in here. But it sounds almost like she's saying you can't keep your whores in here. And I always thought that was an interesting thing. But yeah, it's clear David Chase really loves Luis Buñuel, and he really loves David Lynch, and he loves Twin Peaks, and he's definitely borrowing from that. I don't think it's quite as creative, but I think it's really, really powerful. And obviously everyone knows Sopranos is my favorite show. So though it's more of a nightmare, Vertigo, 1958, Alfred Hitchcock seems the most obvious to me, maybe too obvious, but I love it nonetheless. The editing, the colors, the great Bernard Herrmann score, the imagery, it gives the watcher so much to sink their teeth into if they're watching the film for the first time or the 100th time. Such a wonderful scene. Well, I mean, we all know that Vertigo is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's like, it's perfect. It's like it's a perfect work of art. And I love the dream sequence just because, it's like very much like Mulholland Drive and the Club Silencio sequence. It's like right at that point where there's supposed to be a break in the internal logic, a break from reality for our main character, Scotty. You know, he's like in this illusion, and then suddenly it's going to break, and we're going to be living in a very different sort of world for him. But that nightmare has to take place right when it does, so there can be that shift, so he can have that mental breakdown, which is going to allow for a lot of misogyny, a lot of violence, and a lot of pain to rise to the surface. Like I said, dreams, what are they? Typically, a lot of things are going to rush to the surface that maybe you don't want to be at the surface, and that's certainly the case for this character. But yeah, it's an amazing sequence, I think, because of it does feel absolutely like it's alarming. It's like a nightmare. It's the music. It's very arresting. Like Bernard Herrmann's just really going for it. He's taking, you know, the themes that he used as Scotty is following Madeline, which are very kind of quiet, and there's that kind of very subtle kind of building of the tension with the da 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 da. But then he's bringing it just on full blast here, and the lights are going crazy, and this sludge of all kinds of images, Carlotta Valdez and all this stuff is just coming to the surface, and it is truly terrifying. Yeah, of course the special effects in it are really cheesy, but you know absolutely what it's going for, and that's totally enough for me. And of course Carlotta Valdez does make an appearance in the dream, and it's kind of interesting because we all know that originally Hitchcock wanted, for Madeline, he wanted Vera Miles to play her, and obviously she got pregnant and she couldn't do it. So obviously she was replaced with Kim Novak, but I love that they added her here as Carlotta Valdez. I think that's just a really interesting thing. And so I often like it when characters come to a realization through a dream. That happens in The Sopranos multiple times as an example, but here is a perfect example of that. And it's not like he can actually arrive at it yet, but the seeds are getting planted. Having Carlotta right between the villain and right between the protagonist right there is a really beautiful image and a really dark foreshadowing. But yeah, so those are a few. There are a million ones we could talk about. I didn't even talk about any from David Lynch, so maybe we'll do that next time. But that is the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.